Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama.
Hare Krishna. I am Rajarsi Dasa. Welcome to Hare Krishna today. On today's program, I have a special guest with me. It is His Grace Sankirtana Dasa, a disciple of His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Sankirtan Prabhu, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Okay, well, this is very interesting. The place where we are seated right now, we're in the hills of West Virginia, and His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, happened to be at this place. Our inset photo was taken at this spot. Now, Sankirtan Prabhu, perhaps we can begin with you speaking a bit about your existence before joining the Krishna consciousness movement.
Okay.
Can you please tell us about yourself a bit?
Well, I was actually born in Germany. I came to America at the age of 5. My father was a Polish Jew, and my mother was a German Lutheran.
Interesting.
And so they met after World War II. I was born shortly after World War II, and then I came over to America, to New York City with my parents. I was 5 years old, and I grew up in New York City. And I grew up in a neighborhood that was very diverse. And I had a lot of friends from different traditions and from different ethnic and social backgrounds. And so I was very open to things. And then in the 60s, in the 1960s, I lived as a hippie in the East Village. And I lived not very far from where Prabhupada first started.
You mean 26th Second Avenue?
26th Second Avenue. I lived only a few blocks from there. And I was in college. And at just about that time, I also met my wife in college. And I was majoring in drama and filmmaking, and she was majoring in sociology. And at that time, I decided to do a short documentary on the Hare Krishna devotees for a college, my film project in college.
Okay.
And so my wife at the time, she thought she'd join me, and she decided to do a paper for her sociology class on the background of the devotees in the Hare Krishna movement at that time. This is in 1968, 68 or 69.
Okay.
And so when we and we visited the devotees periodically. And when we graduated in 1970, then we left New York City. We went up to Nova Scotia to live up there. Someone had invited us to live at a farmhouse overlooking the Atlantic Ocean up in Nova Scotia, a very rugged country,
Okay.
wilderness. And the fellow that invited me up there, he said that George Harrison's new album just came out. This is called My Sweet Lord. And so we got that album and brought it up to my friend up in Nova Scotia. And the interesting thing is, on that song, My Sweet Lord, George Harrison sings that song, but in the background, the Hare Krishna prayer is occasionally sung in the background. So this surprised us, that even George Harrison was familiar with the Hare Krishnas and also was chanting Hare Krishna and encouraging others to chant Hare Krishna. And we also, one other thing that we took with us up to Nova Scotia, before we left, we got a Bhagavad Gita from the temple.
Okay.
And then we started studying the Bhagavad Gita Prabhupada's translation. And so we decided, actually, we wanted to start the meditation. But in those days, you couldn't get the Japamala very readily. And so we went to a hobby shop, and then we bought beads, and we made our own the mala on the 108 prayer beads. And so we started chanting. And then a friend of mine, another friend who was living in Madison, Wisconsin at the time, he suggested that I come out to Madison because there was a theater group and I wanted to get back into the theater. And my wife and I, we hitchhiked across through Nova Scotia into the rest of Canada, through Montreal, and then to Toronto. And when we got to Toronto, this is in 1971, we decided, along the way, actually, in the different cities, we were staying at the temple.
Okay.
And Toronto, the devotees at that time said, "Oh, you're in luck. Prabhupada is coming to Detroit in a few days. Why don't you stay and you can see Prabhupada?" And so we stayed in the Toronto temple for several days, and then we went down to Detroit. And there in 1971, I think it was in July, we met Srila Prabhupada for the first time. And the amazing thing about his meeting him and hearing him is that one of the things that struck us was that here is somebody that we already knew. We were reading Prabhupada's books, the Bhagavad Gita, and we had gotten a couple of other books also in the meantime. And then when we heard Prabhupada speak, we were impressed with two things: that here is a genuine sadhu, a genuine holy man, and here was also a person that we already knew. Because what he was saying and the way he was living was non-different than what he was teaching in the books.
Okay.
And so we were very, very impressed. And finally, after 2 days in Detroit, then we continued and we reached our destination in Madison, Wisconsin, and began seriously practicing Krishna consciousness there on our own in Madison, Wisconsin.
Now you mentioned that Srila Prabhupada came and stayed at your house, at this house here.
At this house, yes.
And he was here. Perhaps you can tell us something about your memories of Srila Prabhupada's visit here.
Well, at that time, just on this lawn, Prabhupada, he gave an evening talk, a darshan, on the lawn every evening. And the way it was arranged, because between the devotees that lived here and between the devotees that were visiting, altogether there must have been about 300 devotees.
Okay.
This is in 1976.
All right.
Actually, Prabhupada, he visited New Vrindavan throughout the world. You know, he was constantly traveling throughout the world, presenting the teachings of this ancient Vaishnava tradition and the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But as he traveled, he visited New Vrindavan 4 times. So in 1969, when the community first started, and in 1972, 74, and 76. And so in 1972, Prabhupada actually stayed in a house that was right across the road from here.
Okay.
Right across the road here. He stayed in that house, and I was visiting here in New Vrindavan in 1972.
Where were you based at that time?
Well, I was still in Madison, Wisconsin.
Okay.
I came down from Madison. The devotees here were having a big Janmashtami celebration. And so I think there were about 1,000 people from all over the United States that came here to celebrate Janmashtami with Srila Prabhupada. And there was even an article in the New York Times about the event afterwards.
Okay.
But Prabhupada stayed in 1972, he stayed in the house right across the street. And then he came again in 1974. And the last time he came in 1976, he stayed in the house where we presently live. My wife and I have been at this house for 12 years. We moved into the house in 1999, and we've been here for 12 years. But one of the things that I can share with you, actually, I remember on a morning walk, Prabhupada, the devotees had the opportunity to go on a morning walk with Srila Prabhupada. And the morning walk that I was on, there was one devotee who was very insistent. He wanted to know how many pure souls there were in the world. He wanted a numerical figure. So he was asking Prabhupada, how many pure devotees are there in the world? Actually, Prabhupada ignored the question. And again, during the walk, I think the devotee asked again, and finally he asked for a third time at the end of the walk. This time Prabhupada responded. And the devotee asked again, how many pure devotees are there in the world? And I remember very distinctly, Prabhupada turned to us and he waved his hand and he said, all pure devotees. And so for the Bhagavat, like Srila Prabhupada, he doesn't see distinction between high and low. He sees that everyone is a pure devotee.
Well, I consider myself fortunate to be situated in this place because I don't estimate the power of pure devotees like Srila Prabhupada. In fact, there's a verse often quoted, Bhavad Vidha Bhagavatas Tirtha Bhuta Swayam Vibhu. It's a verse where Yudhishthira glorified his uncle Vidura, and he said, persons like yourself are holy places personified. Because you carry the personality of Godhead within your heart, you turn all places into places of pilgrimage. So Srila Prabhupada came to New York, he made it a place of pilgrimage. Srila Prabhupada came here, now it's a place of pilgrimage. Just last weekend, July 4th weekend, thousands of people visiting here. So we consider ourselves fortunate to be here in the hills of West Virginia. Now, Sankirtan Prabhu.
One of the things that I tell people,
yeah,
because when I was here in 1972, and I also got Prabhupada's darshan in the house across the street, and this, he was talking, and it was not recorded. Very often Prabhupada spoke and things were recorded, but when he first arrived, and he and the devotees entered into that little house. Actually, the house at that time was almost 100 years old. It was, but Prabhupada was talking about Vrindavan and New Vrindavan. He named this place New Vrindavan. And he said that New Vrindavan is non-different than Vrindavan in India. India, of course, there's so many places of pilgrimage. And he said that anyone who comes to New Vrindavan gets the same spiritual blessing as going all the way to Vrindavan, India. So Prabhupada made that blessing upon all of the devotees and all of the pilgrims that he knew that would eventually be coming to visit here in New Vrindavan. And he wanted to see 7 temples on 7 hills.
Well, that's quite inspiring to know, because I was wondering, July 4th, why did so many people from all over, not only the United States, I spoke to many people over the weekend and they came from Canada and other places. So that's interesting. Now, Sankirtan Prabhu, you were famous as a storyteller. Yes, some years ago when I was here, I remember you telling stories. Recently, you were telling stories. Tell us something about, you know, your inspiration to tell stories and the message and so on. Tell us something about your history.
Well,
you know.
My background actually, like I mentioned, I was in college for both filmmaking and theater. And so before I became a devotee, I was involved in theater in New York City and also in Madison, Wisconsin. And then when I became a devotee, I actually wanted to sever all of my attachments. And I was thinking, well, I'll join the Hare Krishna movement and devote my energies to the mission, and I'll give up.
Give up the theater.
The theater. And so I lived in, my wife and I, we moved into the Chicago Temple for several years. But then in 1976, we moved to New Vrindavan. And after being here in New Vrindavan is not just a temple, but it's actually a community. And there's a need for so many aspects of community life. Just like in any town or in any village, there's different aspects. And so I wanted to understand for myself what I could contribute to the New Vrindavan as a community. And I remembered actually that I was, for a while I was thinking about maybe I'll get involved in this craft or that craft, stained glass work or pottery work, this or that. But I remembered that actually I have an interest, I have a skill in theater. And so I started the theater group here in New Vrindavan in 1980. And one of our first efforts, actually, we partook in a competition of Indian drama that was held at Columbia University. It was sponsored by an Indian organization. And out of 8 or 9 entries, we actually, our group won the drama competition.
Oh.
At that time, we performed the Pandavas Retired Timely.
Oh.
And then we performed theater here for many years. But then in the early 90s, because of some health issues, I had to shift my focus. The theater was a little too strenuous. So I shifted my focus into dramatic storytelling. And at that time, I was inspired to find that there is an interest. Actually, there's also an organization here in the United States and in different places around the world that are, there's a renewal in storytelling, because storytelling is an ancient art. Actually, the use of stories in culture is the way the culture preserves and passes on its traditions and its morals and its history through the use of stories from one generation to another. And so this effort of storytelling, it's so ingrained in the Vedic culture, in the Hindu culture, people are not even aware of it. In the traditional katha programs, it's a mixture of chanting, singing, and storytelling, and also sprinkled with some of the teachings and the lessons of the story. And so that traditionally, that is what katha. You have Krishna katha and Ram katha. So the katha programs, the ingredients for that are the stories and the songs and the teachings sprinkled into that. And so in my own way, I've tried to present that here, not only to the devotees and to the Indians, but also to an American audience, a Western audience, to present spiritual understanding through storytelling, and especially through the stories of the Srimad Bhagavatam and through the Mahabharata. Right now I'm working on a book of Mahabharata, which I hope to have completed by the end of the year, maybe available by next spring. That's in 2012.
Quite interesting. Now, perhaps you can tell us a bit about Srila Prabhupada's message and, what do you like to communicate to people from the vast, body of information that Srila Prabhupada brought?
Well, there's a couple of things. One thing I usually try to share is that Prabhupada's message is very authentic, that he is the ambassador and the bearer of a very ancient tradition and this tradition has been passed down from generation to generation, from guru to guru. And Prabhupada is presenting this same ancient message that was spoken 5,000 years ago by Krishna himself. And so one of the things, of course, part of that message, a very important part of that message, is the chanting of the holy name of Krishna. That we can purify ourselves and free ourselves from so many stresses, so many anxieties, because that's the nature of modern society. You know, there's there's so much stress to maintain yourself, to have a livelihood, to have an income, to deal with the dynamics of family life. There's so many different elements in our modern culture that we have to juggle every day. And so one of the things that Prabhupada is making available is a way that we can free ourselves from this anxiety and this distress by engaging in the Hare Krishna meditation.
As before we conclude, what would you like to prescribe that our viewing audience they can actually incorporate in day-to-day life that can bring about enlightenment or peace or bring us closer to what we are looking for?
Well, there's two things, like I mentioned. One is getting some japa mala and chanting on the mala, the Hare Krishna prayer, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And so that prayer is recited on each bead. The devotees make a vow to say so many prayers every day. But anyone in their homes, they can start with, just a few minutes or 10 minutes, 15 minutes of meditation. The thing about, our tradition is that Bhagavad Gita, Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita. He did not only speak it to Arjuna, but actually he's speaking it to each and every one of us. And the amazing thing is that Krishna did not speak Bhagavad Gita to a sadhu, to a monk, but Arjuna was a warrior. He was a worldly man. He was engaged in worldly activities. He had a family. He had so many responsibilities. So Prabhupada is not saying that one should go into the Himalayan mountains to become a yogi. No, you can stay with your family. You can have a profession or an occupation, but just incorporate the chanting, incorporate studying Bhagavad Gita, read the stories of Mahabharata and the Srimad Bhagavatam. Actually, Prabhupada in the Srimad Bhagavatam, he explains in a purport that the Mahabharata, which includes the Bhagavad Gita, is more important in this age than the original Vedas.
Interesting. Okay, Sankirtan Prabhu, we have come to the end of today's program. I'd like to thank you very much for being on the program. And I'm Rajarsi Dasa saying Hare Krishna. And do join us again next week for a continuing presentation. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.